Okay, hello grade 8s, testing 1, 2. Welcome to your explanation of your chapter review. Your test is tomorrow, Thursday. So please use this as your study guide for your test. First question says 0.125 is the same thing as 12.5%. Well, if we look at this as a fraction, it's 125 thousandths, right? I just have to be able to read that decimal as tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 125 thousandths. Since I want to get it as a percent, I need to have it as an equivalent fraction out of 100. Now I could use cross multiplication, use the x here and figure it out, or I know that this is divided by 10, this is divided by 10, 125 divided by 10 is 12.5, and therefore it is 12.5%. So the answer is true. Those are the same thing. Question 2 says this picture shows 43.22%. The answer for this one is false. It actually shows this is 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 41, 42%. But in here, it's 42.22%, or 22 hundredths of a percent, not 43. Question 3 says 10 3/4 is greater than 180%. Well, let's compare the two. Let's change them both to percentages, shall we? So 10 3/4 is really the same thing as 10.75, which is the same thing as 10 75 hundredths, which is the same thing as 1,075 hundredths, which is the same thing as 1,075%. So is 10 3/4 greater than 180%? Yes, it is. It's 1,075% in comparison to 180%, so the answer is true. Question 4 says, if I get 20% interest on my investment over 2 weeks, so I'm going to put $100 as what I invested. Now, if I just get a straight 20% profit, 20% of $100 means my interest will be $20. So over the course of that 2 weeks, I will end up having $120 if I just get straight up 20% interest over 2 weeks. But the other way, if I get 10% interest in the first week, 10% of $100 is $10. That means after 1 week, I now have $110 in the bank. But that $110 is going to grow a further 10% of 110. If I do 10% of that, it's $11. Add that to my 110. Over 2 weeks, using this method, I will have $121, which means the answer is false. It is better to get 10% interest and 10% interest than it is to get a straight up 20% interest. Okay, question 5 says, what is 0.115 as a percent? It is 115 thousandths, which means I can now write that as a decimal or as a fraction, 115 over 1,000, 115 thousandths. And since we're looking for a percent, we want to make an equivalent fraction out of 100. Divide by 10 and divide by 10. That will be 11.5 out of 100, or 11.5%. What is 0.115 as a fraction, not in lowest terms? Well, we just did that. It's 115 thousandths. So that's the answer I'm looking for as a fraction, not in lowest terms. If I ask for lowest terms, I know that 5 is a common factor for both numbers. That would be 23 over 200, which would be your fraction in lowest terms, but it says not in lowest terms, so we're looking for 115 over 1,000. Question 7, what is 5.8% as a decimal? Well, 5.8%, anytime you see percent, make an easy fraction by putting it over 100. That's 5.8%. As an equivalent fraction with no decimal in the numerator, it would be 58 thousandths. And 58 thousandths, tenths, hundredths, thousandths is 58 thousandths, so your answer is 0.058. What is 5.8% as a fraction not in lowest terms? Well, we just did that. If we go back and look, as a fraction not in lowest terms, it's 58 over 1,000 because it was 5.8 over 100, which is 5.8%. Question 9 is a hard question. Most people got it wrong. What is 10 and 9/10 as a percent? Well, 10 and 9/10 as a fraction is this. As a mixed fraction is this, excuse me, mixed. As an improper fraction, it's 109/10. Now remember, we want to get it to a percentage, so we have to create an equivalent fraction with a 100 denominator. Multiply by 10, multiply by 10. I get 1,090 out of 100, which is 1,090%. Not an easy question. What it is as a fraction, well, we could do it either way. We just said before it could be 10 and 9/10 as a mixed fraction or improper. Usually, if given the option, you always show your answer as a mixed fraction. What is 7/50 as a percent? This came from the grade 7 textbook. 7 out of 50 is equal to 14 out of 100, which is equal to 14%. What is 7/50 as a decimal? Well, 7/50, I can't read a fraction and write it as a decimal unless it has a base 10 denominator, 10, 100, or 1,000. I can create the equivalent fraction of 14/100ths, which is written as 14/100ths, tenths, hundredths, 14/100ths. What is 111% of $60? Well, 111% would be 111 out of 100, which is 1 and 11/100ths, which as a decimal is 1 and 11/100ths. Multiply that by 60. I got it wrong in the answer key, but 1.11 multiplied by 60 is 66.6. And since we're dealing with dollars, I need that insignificant zero to make it 60 cents. Question 14, what is 1/5% of 2,000? Well, 1/5% is 1/5 out of 100. You can't have a fraction in a fraction, so we don't want to look at it like that. 1/5 as a decimal is actually this. So these two are the same thing. And this is equivalent to 2/10 out of 100 because I can, multiply by 10, multiply by 10. And as a decimal, it's 2/1000ths, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So multiply that by 2,000, and I get the number 4. %40.3% of 408. Again, we're dealing with percentages, so the first thing I want to do is put 40.3 out of 100. That's 40.3%. An equivalent fraction that doesn't have a decimal would be 403 over 1,000. Simply multiply by 10 because I need to move the decimal one place over, which is 0.403. That's 40.3% of 408. When you take your calculator, you get 164.424. That's money. It says round your answer to the nearest cent, which means that's going to stay at 42 cents. It's closer to 42 cents than it is to 43 cents. So my answer is 164.42. Question 16, a lot of people got this wrong. Again, it's percentages, so I'm going to draw this right away. I'm going to put 0.0003 out of 100. Now for this one, I need to move the decimal once. That's 10 to multiply by 10, multiply by 100, multiply by 1,000. I got to multiply by 10,000 to create an equivalent fraction that doesn't have a decimal in the numerator. And 100 times 10,000 is a million. Okay? And this is 3 millionths, which is 0 decimal, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, 100,000ths, millionths. So that's this percentage as a decimal of 400,000. If you take that and multiply it out, I'm not going to use the calculator, too many button pressing, you'll get 1.2. It doesn't say money, so you don't need the X. It doesn't say money here, so just 1.2 is your answer. What is 60.5% of 120? 60.5%. Again, we have that fraction in the numerator, so we're going to go 60.5%, which is 605 out of 1,000, which is 605 thousandths. Multiply that by 120. 60.5% of 120 is $72.60. Makes sense. Question 18, what is 180%? 180% is 180 out of 100, which is 1 and 80 hundredths. Okay, continuing here. So 180% of $24. 180% is 180 over 100. 1 and 80 hundredths. 1.80. Multiply that by 24. Would be 1 and 80 hundredths, or 1 and 80%, 180% of 24 is 43.2. And since we're dealing with money, we need that insignificant zero, $43.20. Question 19 says, Maddie lends her father Will $500 at a daily interest rate of 4%. If it takes Will 3 days to pay it back, how much does he owe Maddie? Round your answer to the nearest cent. So on day one, I don't pay off my loan. So it's $500. And what I'm going to owe her is 4% of the $500. So 4% as a decimal of $500 is going to be 20 bucks. Right? So at the end of day one, I didn't pay her back, so now I owe her 520 bucks. That's the interest added onto my loan. Day two, I still don't pay it back. So we're 4% more, not of 500, but of the new loan of 520. That's going to be $20.80. Right? So now, at the end of day two, I owe her $540.80. Add on the interest to what I already owed her, and that's what I owe her. And then on day three, I go 4% more of the $540.80. I can use a calculator for this one. So it's 4% of 540.80 equals another $21.63. Add that on to the $540.80 I owe her, and I end up owing her a total of $562.43. So Maddie lending me the $500, because I didn't pay it back for 3 days, I owe an additional $62.43 in interest. Compounded interest. Question 20 says, a car at Crazy Willy's used car and toaster emporium is selling for $1,200. If there is 5% GST and 10% PST, how much will the car cost to buy? So GST is the first tax we're going to calculate. So it's 5% of the $1,200, which will be, well, 10% is $120, so 5% would be half that. Mentally, I can do that as $60. So the car, after I put the GST cost on, is going to be $1,260. The PST is 10%, which is 10 hundredths, but it's not calculated on the 1,200, it's calculated on the 1,260. Mentally, I can do that, move it over one place for 10%. That's $126. Add that on to the $1,260 I already owe, so the final cost will be $1,386. And the last question, Mr. Vallee is selling his motorcycle on Kijiji for $4,400. After the first week, he discounts at 20%, and after the second week, he reduces the sale price a further 15%, and he sells it to Mrs. Moore. How much did the motorcycle sell for? Well, 20% of the $4,400 price will be, well, 10% is $440, so 20% would be double that, $880. So I'm going to take $880 off. Get my calculator out. 4,400. Take away a discount of 20%, which is $880. That motorcycle is now selling for $3,520, but he doesn't sell it, right? So after that second week, he says, listen, I'm going to take this price, I'm going to reduce that price 15 more percent. So 15% off or of the 35.20 is going to be a further discount of $528 more. So you subtract that from the 35.20 and you get $2,992, and that's the price the motorcycle will sell for. Okay? If you have any questions, remember this test that you're going to write tomorrow is going to be identical to this test that we just practiced in form, but not in numbers. So there's going to be variations to it that are going to be a little bit more confusing. But if you can do the questions that are here, you will be able to do every question on the test, no problem. Okay? Good luck to everyone, and we'll see you on Thursday morning.